He hadn't felt anything in 5 years. Not grief, not rage, not even the dull ache that other men called loneliness. Rocco DeLuca had trained himself to feel nothing, because nothing was safer than the alternative. Then he looked up across a children's clothing store on a Tuesday afternoon, and the entire architecture of his carefully constructed emptiness collapsed in the space of a single breath. A woman stood 30 feet away. A little boy turned his head. And Rocco DeLuca, the most feared man on the East Coast, forgot how to move. If this story already has you, hit that like button right now, drop your city in the comments below, and let me know how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next will break you open. The morning Rocco DeLuca decided to buy a birthday gift for his godson, he told himself it was a normal day. He was good at lying to himself by then. 5 years of practice had made him almost convincing. He stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom at 6:45, knotting his tie with the same mechanical precision he applied to everything: contracts, threats, executions. His reflection looked back at him with flat gray eyes that had not softened since the winter Serena disappeared. The bedroom was still too large. He had never bought a smaller bed, never moved to a different wing of the house, never changed the color of the walls from the deep cream she had chosen on their first anniversary. He didn't know if that made him loyal or pathetic. He suspected it was both. Marcus knocked twice before entering, the way he always did. His consigliere of 11 years, a lean man in his mid-50s with a jaw like a cement block and the quiet efficiency of someone who had seen everything worth seeing. He handed Rocco the morning briefing without a word and waited by the door while Rocco scanned the page. Anything urgent? The Falcone situation is managed. Esposito wants a sit-down before Friday, and your mother called. Rocco set the paper down on the dresser. Tell Esposito Thursday works, and don't return my mother's call. Marcus didn't blink. She said it was personal. Everything she says is personal. That's what makes her dangerous. He smoothed the front of his jacket and turned away from the mirror. I'll be at Hargrove Square by noon. I need something for Leo's birthday. Something a 6-year-old actually wants, not what Elena keeps buying him. You're going alone? I'm taking Dante and Viteri. And the car? The black one, not the armored one. He caught Marcus's expression. I'm buying a toy, Marcus, not conducting a war council. Marcus said nothing, which was his way of saying plenty. Pochette. Hargrove Square was the kind of place Rocco generally avoided. Too many people moving in too many directions. Too much noise compressed into too little space. But it was Leo's 6th birthday, and the boy had made the specific request to someone at Elena's dinner party 3 weeks back that he wanted the new remote-controlled racing set they'd seen in the window of the toy store on the 3rd level. Elena had relayed this to Rocco with the energy of someone delivering classified intelligence. Rocco had taken it seriously because Leo was one of the only people left in his life who he was entirely certain loved him without calculation. He moved through the mall's ground level with Dante 3 feet behind his right shoulder and Viteri scanning the left perimeter. People noticed him. They always did. Something in the posture. The stillness of a man who had learned that stillness was its own form of power. But nobody approached. Nobody ever approached Rocco DeLuca in a public space unless they had a death wish or a debt. He took the escalator to the 3rd floor. The toy store was at the far end, past a cluster of children's clothing boutiques and a small cafe that smelled of burned espresso and overpriced pastries. He moved through the crowd without looking left or right, his mind already running parallel calculations. The Esposito sit-down, the Northern Territory report, the container that had gone dark somewhere between Baltimore and Providence. He never would have seen her if the child hadn't turned around. He was passing the entrance to a children's clothing store, pale wood fixtures, small tables stacked with folded things in primary colors, the soft instrumental nonsense they always played in stores like that, when something stopped him. Not a sound, not a scent, something older than either, something in the base of the skull that he hadn't felt since the last time he'd been truly afraid. He stopped walking. Dante almost ran into him. Boss? Rocco didn't answer. His eyes had already found her. She was standing at a rack near the far wall, her back partially turned, holding up 2 small jackets and comparing them with the focused, unhurried attention of a woman who was thinking about nothing beyond the immediate task. Her hair was different, shorter, darker at the roots. And she was thinner than he remembered, the kind of thin that comes not from vanity, but from years of worry. She wore a simple gray dress and flat shoes, and she carried herself with a quiet self-containment that had always been her most infuriating quality. Even now, even with 5 years and an ocean of silence between them. Serena. His chest did something that had no name in any language he spoke. Not pain, exactly. Not relief. Something rawer than both, something that pushed up from behind his sternum and pressed against the back of his throat until it became nearly impossible to breathe correctly. She hadn't seen him. And then the children moved. He noticed them a half-second later. 3 of them, small and identically built, with the same slight frame and the same dark hair that Serena had always had. They were clustered near a low display table a few feet to her left, 2 of them arguing in urgent whispers over something small and unidentifiable, the third standing slightly apart, looking at nothing in particular with the 1,000-yard stare that small children sometimes get when they are bored beyond comprehension. Triplets. His mind registered the word before he fully understood what he was looking at. The one standing apart turned his head. He was looking for his mother. That was clear from the way his gaze tracked toward her before drifting sideways and landing, by pure accident, on the man standing frozen in the entrance 30 feet away. The boy had Serena's jaw, Serena's coloring, Serena's small, precise nose. But the eyes were steel blue, pale and sharp, and unmistakable. Rocco's eyes. The exact same eyes that looked back at him from the mirror every morning while he lied to himself about normal days. The child stared at him for 2 or 3 seconds with the frank, fearless curiosity of someone who has not yet learned that strangers are dangerous. Then he looked away, back toward his mother, and tugged at the hem of her dress. Serena turned. For one fraction of 1 second before she saw him, her face was entirely open, tired and fond and ordinary in the specific way of a woman managing 3 children in a clothing store on a Tuesday. Then her eyes found his, and the color drained out of her face like water out of a tilted glass. She knew him. Of course she knew him. The hand holding the small jacket went rigid. Her other hand moved, instantly, without thought, placing itself on the nearest child's shoulder. Rocco DeLuca stood in the entrance of a children's clothing store on the 3rd floor of Hargrove Square and felt, for the first time in 5 years, something that was not nothing. It was closer to the end of the world. He walked toward her. He didn't decide to. His legs moved, and the rest of him followed because there was no universe in which he could turn around and walk away from those eyes. From her. From the 3 small people who shared half his blood and whose names he did not know. Dante started to follow. Rocco raised one hand without turning, a single flat gesture, and Dante stopped. He covered the 30 feet between them in what felt like 10 years and 3 seconds simultaneously. The other shoppers moved around him like water around a stone. He was not aware of them. He was aware of only the slight tightening of Serena's jaw as he approached, the way her chin came up by half an inch in the old familiar gesture that meant she was frightened and would absolutely not show it, and the way her hand pressed more firmly against the child's shoulder. He stopped 4 feet from her, close enough to speak quietly, close enough to see the faint shadows beneath her eyes that hadn't been there before, and the single line between her brows that 5 years of being alone and afraid had pressed into her face. He looked at her for a long time without saying anything. She held his gaze. Her breathing was controlled and careful in the way of someone who had rehearsed some version of this moment without ever believing it would actually happen. "Rocco," she said. "Serena." His voice came out flatter than he intended. There was too much behind it to let any of it through. "These are your children?" She did not move. "Yes." "How old are they?" The pause that followed lasted approximately 3 seconds. It felt like considerably longer. "5," she said. The word landed in his chest like something thrown from a height. 5. They were 5 years old. She had left 5 years and 4 months ago. He did not need to do the arithmetic slowly. It came together in the space of a single heartbeat with the particular cruelty of facts that have been true all along. He looked at the 3 children, really looked at them, the way he hadn't allowed himself to in those first stunned seconds. The one who had met his eyes had gone back to the low display table and was now tugging the arm of one of his siblings with the single-minded urgency of a child who has found something interesting. 2 boys and a girl, from what he could tell. All of them small and quick, and entirely at ease in the way of children who have been held and spoken to and loved without interruption. He looked back at Serena. "Tell me," he said, "that I'm wrong." Her jaw tightened, her eyes stayed on his. "Rocco, tell me I'm wrong." She said nothing. And in the specific weight of her silence, he had his answer. The children had not noticed the exchange between the 2 adults. Children rarely notice the things that will matter most to them later. They are too busy with the immediate world of small objects and small arguments and the intense negotiations of siblings. The girl had produced something from her coat pocket, a tiny figure of some kind, plastic, possibly a horse, and was currently refusing to let either of her brothers hold it. The dispute was escalating with quiet urgency. Serena watched them with the involuntary attention of a mother who is tracking 3 separate children while simultaneously dealing with something catastrophic. It was an impressive piece of multitasking, and under any other circumstances, Rocco might have noted it with something other than the hollow roaring currently occupying the space behind his eyes. "We can't do this here," she said. Her voice was low, steady, careful. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "I'm standing in a store. I'm asking you a simple question." "It isn't simple." "It's the simplest question I've ever asked." He leaned forward, fractionally, just enough that she would hear him clearly without the risk of anyone nearby catching the words. "Are those my children, Serena?" She looked at him for one long moment. Then she said, quietly and precisely, "Yes." The word went through him like something surgical, clean entry, catastrophic damage. He straightened up. He breathed. He did both of these things because they were the only things available to him, and because the alternative, whatever the alternative was not something he was prepared to allow himself in a public space with 2 of his soldiers 20 feet away. "We need to talk," he said. "I know." "Not here." "I know that too." She looked at the children again. The brief, compulsive check of a woman who has spent 5 years alone with 3 small people and learned that you never take your eyes off all 3 simultaneously. "There's a cafe on this level, on the East End. Give me 10 minutes to settle them." He nodded. She turned away from him and crouched down to the level of the nearest child, the girl, and said something in a low voice that made the girl look up at her with the specific focused attention that children reserve for moments when they understand, without being told exactly why, that something important is happening. Rocco watched for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked toward the cafe, because if he stood there any longer watching Serena Vale speak to his 5-year-old daughter, whose name he did not know, he was going to come apart in a children's clothing store, and that was simply not going to happen. Chuck. He took a table at the far end of the cafe, back to the wall, sight lines to both entrances. Viteri positioned himself near the east door. Dante took the escalator landing. Neither of them knew what was happening, and neither of them asked. They had both worked for Rocco long enough to understand that when his face looked like that, you did not ask questions. He ordered coffee he didn't want and sat with his hands flat on the table and tried to do what he always did: compartmentalize, calculate, control the variables. It didn't work. The variables in this particular situation were 5 years old and had his eyes, and he had just met them for the first time without knowing their names, and no amount of discipline was adequate preparation for that. She arrived in 11 minutes, not 10. She came without the children. He looked past her automatically, his chest constricting, and must have read his face because she said immediately, "They're with the store associate. She has a coloring station near the back. They'll be fine for 20 minutes. She sat down across from him, set her bag on the chair beside her, folded her hands on the table, and did not look away from him. He studied her the way he studied contracts, looking for the fine print, the clause that would change everything. She was 31 now. She had been 26 when she left. The intervening years were written on her not in ugliness, but in a kind of stripped-down solidity, the quality of someone who has been through something that required everything they had and came out the other side without the luxury of softness. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Rocco." "From the beginning, Serena." She looked down at the table for a moment. Then she looked back up. I was already pregnant when I left, she said. 8 weeks. I didn't know until 2 weeks before. She paused. I found out the same week I received the documents. What documents? It was not a question. His voice was flat and even and entirely controlled. Letters, she said. 3 of them, written on your personal stationery, signed with your signature, addressed to your mother. She held his gaze without flinching, even though everything in her posture said that holding his gaze was costing her something. They outlined a plan to deal with the problem of my pregnancy. The concern that a child, or children, it turned out, could complicate the DeLuca succession, that there were parties who believed I was not appropriate as the permanent wife of a Don, that the cleanest solution was to remove both the pregnancy and the mother simultaneously. The silence that followed was absolute. Rocco's hands, which had been flat on the table, were no longer flat. He didn't notice until he looked down and saw that his knuckles were white. You thought I wrote those letters, he said. They had your signature. Her voice didn't waver. They had the stationery, the wax seal. The phrasing was yours, your rhythms, the way you structure sentences. Whoever wrote them knew you. And you believed them. I believed them because I was 8 weeks pregnant and terrified, and I had 24 hours to decide whether I was going to trust that they were false and stay and potentially put my children at risk, or take my chance and run. She exhaled slowly. I had the children to think about, not just myself. He sat with that. Let it sit on him. Let it. He had spent 5 years building a story in his head. Not a story he believed exactly, but the story that made the most sense out of the available facts. She had left. She had not said goodbye. She had not called, written, sent word through any of the channels available to the wife of a man with his resources. The conclusion most people drew, including, eventually, some of the people who worked for him, was that she had chosen to go. That there was someone else, or simply that she had wanted a different life and had taken it. Rocco had never fully believed it, but he had lived inside the version of it that hurt the least, which was the one where she was a woman who had made a choice and he was a man who had the dignity not to chase her. And the entire time she had been somewhere raising his children, alone, afraid, believing he had wanted her dead. What made you run to? He said very carefully. Where have you been? Portland, then a small town in Vermont, then Portland again. A pause. I worked. I saved. I made a life that was stable enough for 3 children. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite pride, but close to it, the kind that comes from having done something very hard without any help. I didn't ask anyone for anything. You had my children, he said, and his voice came out wrong too quiet, too careful, the way it got when he was holding something back that did not want to be held. You had 3 of my children, and I didn't know they existed. I know. 5 years. I know, Rocco. Every birthday. He stopped, started again. Every first word, He stopped again. She watched him. She didn't apologize, didn't rush to fill the silence, didn't soften it. She let him sit in it because there was nothing she could say that would make it smaller, and she seemed to understand that. He had always respected that about her, the way she didn't reach for easy comfort when the truth was uncomfortable. What are their names? He said. Something in her face shifted, almost imperceptibly, the first crack in the controlled surface. Marco, she said. The one who was standing apart, the one who... She stopped. He has your eyes. I've known it since the day he was born. A pause. The other boy is Luca. The girl is Ava. Marco, Luca, Ava. He repeated the names internally, once, twice, 3 times, pressing them into memory with the same deliberate force he applied to things he could not afford to lose. I want to meet them, he said. She didn't answer immediately. Her hands tightened together on the table. Rocco, they're my children. They don't know anything about you. They know their father isn't in the picture. I haven't... She pressed her lips together. They're 5. They're just 5 years old. You can't walk back in there and... I'm not suggesting I walk back in there and announce myself. I'm not an idiot. He looked at her steadily. I'm telling you that I want to meet them, that I will meet them. The only question is how quickly that happens and under what circumstances, and I am, for the moment, extending you the courtesy of having an opinion about that. She looked at him for a long moment. The assessment in her eyes was careful and old. The look of a woman who had measured him once before and been badly wrong and was not interested in being wrong again. I need time, she said, and I need to know... She paused. I need to know who gave me those letters, Rocco, because whoever it was is still in your world. And if I bring my children near that world, I'll find out who it was, he said. How quickly? Faster than you'd believe. She studied him. Something shifted in the calculation behind her eyes. Not trust, not yet, not by a long distance, but the first movement of something that had been absolutely still for 5 years. Give me 3 days, she said. I need to think. I need to... She exhaled. I need to figure out how to explain to 3 5-year-olds why a man who looks like Marco is suddenly standing in their lives asking questions. He said nothing. 3 days, she said again. You'll stay, he said. In the city. It wasn't quite a question. She heard the weight in it anyway. She held his gaze. I'm not running, Rocco. Not this time. I'm done running. She reached into her bag and produced a small card. Plain white, a phone number handwritten in her precise, narrow script. She slid it across the table. 3 days. He picked up the card, looked at it, put it in his inside jacket pocket. 3 days, he said. She stood, gathered her bag, and paused with her hand on the back of the chair. She was looking at the table rather than at him. They're good children, she said, and her voice was different on those words. Thinner, quieter, stripped of the careful control that had held everything else together. They're kind and funny, and Marco reads already, and Luca is... She stopped, swallowed. They're good. He looked up at her. I believe you, he said. She nodded once, and then she walked away, back toward the children's clothing store, back toward Marco and Luca and Ava. And Rocco DeLuca sat alone at the back of a cafe with a cup of coffee cooling in front of him and a phone number in his jacket pocket and the names of 3 children he had never met pressed into his memory like scar tissue. He sat there for a very long time. Viteri eventually drifted closer, just near enough to be visible. Rocco looked up at him. Get the car, he said, and tell Dante I need Marcus on the phone by the time we hit the lobby. He stood up, straightened his jacket, breathed. He walked out of the cafe and back through the bright crowded corridors of Hargrove Square, and he did not look toward the children's clothing store as he passed it, because if he did, he was not certain what he would do. The escalator descended. The lobby opened out around him, vast and light-filled and entirely indifferent to the specific catastrophe currently reorganizing everything inside his chest. Outside, the black car was waiting. He got in. Marcus picked up on the second ring. Boss? I need the full record of everything surrounding Serena's disappearance, Rocco said. Every contact she had in the 6 months before she left. Every visitor to the house. Every piece of correspondence that went out on my stationery. He paused. And Marcus? Yes. This is contained to you. No one else in the organization has this conversation. No one knows what I'm looking for or why. Not until I tell you differently. A beat of silence. Understood, Marcus said. I want preliminary findings in 48 hours. I'll start tonight. Rocco ended the call. The car moved through the city, the afternoon light sliding across the windows, and somewhere on the north side of town in a hotel room or a rental apartment or wherever she had taken them, Serena Vale was settling 3 5-year-olds and explaining, or not explaining, whatever the current version of the truth looked like from where she stood. Marco. Luca. Ava. He pressed the names into the silence behind his ribs like something he intended to keep. The car moved. The city moved around it. And 48 hours from now, Marcus would hand him a file, and whatever was in that file was going to change something that was already in the process of being changed, irrevocably, permanently, at the root level where all the things he had built his life upon had always, apparently, been standing on ground he had not properly examined. The light changed. The car stopped. Rocco looked out the window at nothing in particular and understood, with the complete and terrible clarity of a man who has not felt anything for 5 years and is now feeling everything at once, that the next 48 hours were going to be the longest of his life, and that he was only just beginning to understand the shape of what had been done to him. Okay. Marcus called back in 31 hours. "You need to come to the office," he said. No preamble. "Not over the phone." Rocco arrived in 12 minutes. Marcus was already at the table when he came through the door. The private conference room on the 4th floor that they used for things that couldn't be discussed on any electronic surface. A single folder sat in the center of the table, thin and terrible. Marcus had the look of a man who had spent 31 hours wishing he had found something different. "Tell me," Rocco said. "The letters were written on your stationery," Marcus said. "From the private batch. The kind kept in the study, not the office supply. No one accessed that study without house staff involvement." He paused. "I pulled the staff logs from that period. Cross-referenced access. There were 3 people in that study in the 2 weeks before Serena left." He paused. "2 of them were you." Rocco waited. "The third," Marcus said, "was your mother." The room was very quiet. "The signature was forged," Marcus continued, his voice flat and careful and entirely without inflection, the voice of a professional who understood the weight of what he was delivering. "Expertly. She had samples. She had time. She used your penmanship tutor. She paid him separately, quietly, in a transaction I found buried under 3 layers of redirected payments." He opened the folder and turned it so Rocco could see the top page. "She bribed the lawyer who first approached Serena with additional documents. She coordinated with someone in the household staff who has since been dismissed. She built a complete picture. Every element was designed to be convincing enough that a frightened pregnant woman with no resources and no one she could safely trust would believe it." Rocco looked at the page. He looked at the numbers, the dates, the connections laid out in Marcus's precise notation. He followed the thread from one point to the next. He did not say anything for a long time. "She knew about the pregnancy," he said finally. "Yes." Marcus's voice was careful. "That's in the supplementary notes. There was a medical contact, a nurse from the clinic Serena visited. Small payment, untraceable if you don't know where to look." "She found out Serena was pregnant," Rocco said, saying it aloud, step by step, because it needed to be said in full. "And she decided that was unacceptable. So she fabricated evidence that I wanted Serena eliminated. She scared her badly enough that a woman who was 8 weeks pregnant went into hiding rather than come to me." "Yes." "And Serena spent 5 years believing I had signed the order to have her killed." "Yes." "While my mother," he said, "sat at my table, every Sunday, for 5 years." Marcus said nothing. Rocco closed the folder. He pushed it back toward Marcus. He stood up and walked to the window and looked out at the city below. The city he ran. The city that operated according to his will and moved in the patterns he set. And he felt something that he had not felt since he was a young man before he understood what his family truly was. He felt the specific bone-deep betrayal of someone who has been deceived not by an enemy, but by the person who was supposed to be the fixed point. The one certainty in a life built on the management of uncertainty. His mother, who had sat across from him at Sunday dinner for 5 years, who had occasionally mentioned Serena's name with a precisely calibrated mixture of distaste and false sympathy, who had more than once in the early years suggested that perhaps it was time he moved forward, found someone more suitable. Someone more suitable. He pressed the back of his hand against the cold glass of the window. "Marcus," he said. "Yes." "I need 2 things." His voice came out steady and quiet, each word placed with the care of a man who is controlling something enormous and cannot afford to let it out here. In this room, not yet. "I need Serena to see this file. Today, if she's willing. And I need my mother brought to the East House by tonight." Marcus didn't hesitate. "I'll arrange both." "And Marcus." "Yes, boss." Rocco turned from the window. "No one touches her," he said. "She comes in, she sits down, and then she answers for what she did." He held Marcus's gaze. "The answering is mine." Marcus nodded once. Rocco picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He had 3 children he had never properly met. He had a wife who had spent 5 years afraid of him, and he had a mother who had built the architecture of that fear, brick by careful brick, because she had judged Serena Vale and found her unworthy, and decided, with the cold certainty of a woman who had always believed she knew best, that the solution was removal. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the door. He had a great deal to do before tonight, and none of it, not a single part of it, was going to be easy. But he found, stepping back into the corridor, that easy had stopped being a relevant category somewhere around the moment a small boy with steel blue eyes had turned his head in a children's clothing store and looked at him without knowing what he was looking at. There was only necessary now. And necessary, Rocco DeLuca had never had any trouble with at all. Serena was standing at the window of the hotel room when her phone rang. She had been watching the street below for no particular reason. Old habit, the way you develop habits when you spend 5 years checking exits and memorizing faces and knowing which parked cars belong and which ones don't. The 3 children were asleep. It was 11 in the morning, and they had been up since 5:30 because Luca had woken from a dream that frightened him and woken the others in the process. And by the time she had settled all 3 back down, the night was already beginning to lighten at the edges, and there was no recovering it. She was running on coffee and something that might have been adrenaline but felt, at this point, more like the thing that comes after adrenaline runs out. The phone number was the one Marcus had sent, not Rocco's personal line, which she didn't have, but a secondary contact number that had arrived in a text with no signature and no explanation beyond the single sentence. "He needs to see you today. He has something you should look at." She had stared at that text for 4 minutes before responding. Now she pressed the phone to her ear. "Yes." "It's Marcus." His voice was the same as she remembered. Dry, unhurried, with the flat economy of a man who treated words the way other men treated money. "Are you somewhere you can speak?" "The children are asleep." "I'll be brief. The Dawn has completed a preliminary investigation into the circumstances surrounding your departure." A short pause. "He'd like you to come to a location I'll send separately and review the findings." She said nothing. "The findings," Marcus continued, with the faintly careful inflection of a man delivering something fragile, "are significant." "How significant?" "Significant enough that you should review them before deciding anything further." Another pause. "He asked me to tell you that you will not be pressured. You come, you look at what we found, you leave if you want to. No obligation." She looked out the window at the street. A woman was walking a dog below, moving at the slow pace of someone with nowhere urgent to be. An ordinary Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday that had nothing to do with any of this. "When?" she said. 2:00. "I can have a car." "I'll drive myself." A beat. "All right." He gave her the address and ended the call without further comment. She set the phone down on the windowsill. From the bedroom came the sound of one of the children shifting in sleep. Probably Luca, whose sleep was always restless. She tilted her head toward the sound, listening for the specific quality that meant he was waking up. She had learned, over 5 years, the exact difference between the sounds of a child turning over and the sounds of a child about to sit up and start talking. It settled back into quiet. She had 2 hours. She called the front desk and arranged for the hotel's childcare service. She had used it twice before, during this visit, for grocery runs and a brief, necessary meeting with her attorney. And then she stood in the bathroom splashing cold water on her face and looked at herself in the mirror with the frank, unsentimental attention of a woman who has long since stopped expecting the mirror to be kind. She looked tired. She had looked tired for years. She looked also like a woman who was about to walk into the heart of something she had spent 5 years avoiding, carrying information she did not yet have, to sit across from a man who had every reason in the world to be furious with her and who had, so far, not been, at least not in the way she had expected. That worried her more than the fury would have. The address was a private building in the financial district, one of the properties Rocco owned under a subsidiary name, the kind of place that appeared on no public registry as having anything to do with the DeLuca organization. She had known about buildings like this when she was his wife. She knew enough about how his world worked to understand that the ones that weren't obvious were always the ones that mattered. She was shown up by a man she didn't recognize, young, quiet, with the particular posture of someone who is armed and not attempting to hide the fact. He left her outside a door on the 4th floor and knocked twice and stepped back. Marcus opened it. He had aged, not dramatically, but in the particular way of men who carry other people's decisions. More lines around the eyes, a grayer cast to the close-cut hair. He looked at her for a brief, unreadable moment and then stepped back to let her in. Rocco was standing at the far side of the room. He had his jacket off, which was unusual. She had rarely seen him without the jacket, without the specific armor of presentation that the jacket represented. He was standing with one hand on the back of a chair, and when she came in, he looked up, and the first thing she noticed was that he looked like someone who had not slept. The second thing she noticed was the folder on the table. "Serena," he said. "Rocco." He gestured to the chair across from his. She sat. He sat. Marcus moved to the far corner of the room with the practiced invisibility of a man who has spent decades being present without intruding. Rocco put his hand on the folder and pushed it across the table toward her. He didn't say anything, just watched her with those flat gray eyes. She opened it. She read. The room was very quiet while she read. She was aware of it the way you are aware of a held breath. The particular quality of silence in a space where two people are both trying not to show what they are feeling. She turned pages. She followed the entries. She read the notation that named the clinic, the nurse, the payment that had been made 10 days before she received the letters. She read the analysis of the forged signatures. She read the financial trace that went from a redirected payment account to a man she did not know the name of, but whose role was described clearly enough. She closed the folder. She sat with her hands flat on the cover for a moment. "Your mother," she said. "Yes." She looked up. His face was controlled in the way of a man who has been controlling it for approximately 30 hours without a break. "She knew about the pregnancy," Serena said. "Yes." "Before I did, before I knew how to process it. She already knew, and she had already—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together and looked at the folder and then looked back at him. "She built the whole thing in under 2 weeks, from the moment she found out." "Yes." "And the letters." She exhaled slowly. "The phrasing, the way the sentences were built. I thought—" She stopped. Her voice had gone thin, and she did not want it to go thin. She breathed. "I thought I knew your voice well enough to know when something was really you. I thought that was— I believed it because it sounded exactly like you, because she knew you well enough to make it sound exactly like you." "She did," he said. "I'm not saying that to justify—" "I know why you're saying it." He looked at the folder. "You don't need to justify it to me. The evidence was designed to be convincing. It was convincing." Pause. "That's not what I'm angry about." She looked at him. "What are you angry about?" He met her eyes. "That she did it at all," he said. "That someone in my own house made a decision about my wife, about my children, about the shape of my life, and executed it so completely that it held for 5 years, that I did not know my own home well enough to prevent it." He paused. "That my children are 5 years old, and I have never been in the same room with them." His voice did not change pitch on any of that, did not crack or heat or do any of the things voices do when feeling overwhelms capacity. But she could hear it underneath, the thing being held back, the pressure behind the controlled surface. She had known his voice for years. She knew the difference. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "When you found out, when Marcus told you what she'd done," she held his gaze, "what was the first thing you felt?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I'll tell you when you tell me one thing." "What?" "The night you left." His voice dropped slightly. "When you walked out of that house, did you believe, not think, believe, that I had signed an order to have you killed?" She held his gaze. The room was still. "Yes," she said. He nodded. Just once, like a man confirming something he already knew but needed to hear. "Then the first thing I felt," he said, "was that I understood why you ran." She looked away. She had not expected that. She had prepared for many things in the hours since Marcus's call, but not that. And it moved through her with the particular force of the unexpected, the thing you are not braced for. She breathed, looked back. "What happens now?" she said. "Now," he said. "She answers for it." Mobbed. Carmela DeLuca arrived at the East House at 7:45 in the evening. She had been told only that Rocco wanted to speak with her. Not why, not what about. She had come in her usual way, the way she always entered the rooms her son occupied, ahead of her own presence, as if the space rearranged itself around her arrival. She was 63 years old. She wore black, as always, had worn it for 20 years since Rocco's father died, with the consistency of a woman who had decided early on what her costume would be and found it useful. Her hair was silver and precisely arranged. Her hands were still. She moved through the front room of the East House with the assurance of someone who has never had to wonder whether she belonged somewhere. Rocco was seated at the table in the main room. Marcus stood near the wall. She registered Marcus's presence with a fractional shift of her eyes, and then looked at her son. Her expression did what it always did. Calibrated, searching, reading the room the way she had always read rooms. She sat down across from him without being invited. "You look terrible," she said. "When did you last sleep?" "Sit down, Mama." "I am sitting." She arranged her bag on the chair beside her. "What is this about?" Marcus was entirely useless on the phone, which means you told him to be, which means whatever this is, you think it requires your personal management. He put the folder on the table between them. She looked at it. She looked at it for 2 seconds and then looked up at him, and something in her expression shifted. Barely, the smallest recalibration. And that was how he knew, in the final definitive way, that Marcus had been right. "Open it," Rocco said. "Rocco, open the folder, Mama." She did not open it. She looked at him instead, with the level, composed attention of a woman who has decided she is going to control this conversation and is simply deciding which angle to approach from. "I don't know what's in there," she said. "That is the most unconvincing lie you have ever told me," he said. "And you have told me many." A pause. Something moved across her face. Not guilt, exactly, but close to its border. "I did what I thought was necessary," she said. The room temperature did not change. His expression did not change. But something in the quality of the air between them shifted in the specific way of something that has been structural becoming suddenly unstable. "You thought it was necessary," he said. "That girl was... Her name is Serena." "That girl," she said again, with the deliberate precision of a woman choosing her battles, "was not right for you. Not for the family. Not for what you were building. She was sentimental and soft, and she would have made you soft. And soft men in your position do not survive long enough to... She was carrying my children." Carmela stopped. "3 children," he said. "Triplets. Which you knew. Because you had a contact inside the clinic she went to for her first appointment." He watched her face. "You knew before she had decided what she was going to do. Before she'd had the chance to come to me. And you made the decision for all of us. I made the decision that protected this family. You destroyed mine." The words landed with a quiet and absolute finality. She absorbed them, did not look away. He gave her credit for that, even now. She had never been a woman who looked away. "You would have kept her," Carmela said. "Regardless, 3 children is... You would have put her at the center of this family and handed her a position she was not equipped to hold, and eventually that would have cost you. I knew that before you knew it yourself." "You're telling me," Rocco said very quietly, "that you fabricated evidence convincing my wife that I had ordered her death, that you bribed medical staff and forged my signature and paid a lawyer to make it all legal-looking, that you drove a pregnant woman out of her home and out of the country with 3 of my children in her body. And you're telling me that this was protection. I'm telling you it was necessary. For who? For the family. There is no family." He leaned forward, just fractionally, just enough. "I have been alone in that house for 5 years, Mama. I have been running an empire alone, sitting at a table alone, sleeping in a room that still smells like her, alone. My children have been growing up somewhere I didn't know, learning to walk and talk and read, and I wasn't there. For 5 years. And you sat across from me every Sunday." "Rocco." Every Sunday," he said. "For 5 years. And you said nothing." She held his gaze. Her hands were folded on the table. They were not, he noticed, entirely still. "I did what I believed was right," she said. I know you did. He sat back. His voice had not risen. It would not rise. There was nothing in him that wanted to shout. What he felt was too large for shouting, too structural, the kind of thing that expresses itself not in heat, but in the cold, decisive rearrangement of everything beneath. And now I'm going to do what I believe is right. She looked at him. You are removed from every position within this organization, he said. Every privilege, every access, every courtesy that came to you as my mother operating in my world. Your account at the Commerce Street office is frozen as of this morning. Your access to the Westfield property is revoked. The people who were yours, Carlucci, Bennett, the two men from the old Salerno crew who were loyal to you personally, they are told tonight that your relationship with this organization is concluded. He paused. The house in Ridgemont is still yours. Your personal finances are not touched. I am not leaving you without resources. But you do not operate. You do not make calls on behalf of this family. You do not speak to any member of this organization about anything related to business. And you do not... He stopped, held. You do not come near my children. The last sentence was very quiet. Something crossed her face. For one moment, just one. The composure fractured, and he saw what was underneath it. Not remorse, he didn't think, but something. The recognition, perhaps, that she had miscalculated, that the outcome she had managed so carefully for 5 years had produced, in the end, this, her son's face across a table telling her she was finished. You're choosing her over your own. I'm choosing my children, he said, and I'm choosing the truth. He stood, buttoned his jacket. Marcus will handle the details. You'll be taken home tonight. He looked at her one final time. Don't call me, Mama. I'll call you when I'm ready. I don't know when that will be. He walked out of the room. Behind him, the door closed with a quiet, definitive sound, and Carmela DeLuca sat alone at the table with the folder in front of her, and the absolute silence of a woman who has lived her entire life convinced she was the one who understood what was necessary, confronting for the first time the specific wreckage of that conviction. Yet, Rocco drove himself back across the city, something he almost never did. There were always reasons not to, logistics, security, the expectation that someone else handles the car. But tonight he needed the wheel under his hands and the city moving past the windows and the specific solitude of motion. He called Serena from the car. She picked up on the third ring. It's late. I know. Are the children asleep? A brief pause at the implied familiarity of the question. The word children without qualification, the way you'd say it about people you had the right to ask about. Yes, she said, since 9. He said nothing for a moment. The city moved. He passed through an intersection where the light was red, and he stopped, even though the street was empty because some habits are deep enough that they survive everything. I spoke with her tonight, he said, a longer pause. And? She confirmed it. Not in so many words, but she confirmed it. He looked at the red light. She believes she did the right thing. She may believe that until she dies. I don't expect that to change. Serena said nothing. She's out of the organization, he said. Every access, every privilege. The men who were loyal to her personally are informed tonight. He paused. She won't be a threat to you, to the children. I want you to understand that concretely, not as a reassurance. A reassurance would be hollow, coming from you right now. I know. Another pause. The light changed. He moved. I want to see them, he said. Marco, Luca, and Ava. I understand you need to prepare them. I'm not asking for tomorrow. But I want a date, something real, not open-ended. She was quiet for a long time. He drove. The city slid past. Saturday, she said finally. There's a park 2 blocks from the hotel. Open space, public. They're comfortable there. A pause. We don't tell them everything at once. We tell them you're someone Mama knows, someone important. We let them ask what they ask. All right. Rocco. Her voice was careful. If Marco asks who you are... He waited. If he looks at you and asks who you are, she said, what are you going to say? He drove in silence for 1 full block. I'm going to tell him the truth, he said, as much of it as a 5-year-old can hold. and then I'm going to ask him what he wants for lunch, and let him decide whether he wants to keep talking or not." She exhaled, a small sound close to something, not quite relief. "Saturday," she said again. "Saturday," he said. He ended the call. He drove back to the house that had been too large and too cold and too full of her absence for 5 years, and he pulled into the drive and sat with the engine off in the dark of the garage for a while, not thinking exactly, not planning, just sitting with the shape of the last 48 hours and the specific, enormous, unprecedented quality of what was coming. Saturday. He had 5 days. The days between were not quiet. Word travels in the way it always travels in a world like his, not through announcement but through implication, the changing of small signals that men in his world have learned to read the way other people read weather. The fact that Carmela DeLuca no longer had the standing she'd had, the fact that Carlucci had been quietly reassigned, the fact that the East House meetings, which Carmela had attended, irregularly but with the consistency of someone who belongs, were no longer extended to her. People noticed. People always notice. What they did not notice, because Rocco had been meticulous about it, was why. The internal architecture of the DeLuca organization processed the change the way it processed all changes from the top, without public commentary, with a rapid recalibration of who held what position in the informal hierarchy, and with the specific animal alertness of people who understand that when the structure shifts, it is wise to understand the shift before committing to a position. What they also did not notice was the secondary investigation Marcus had been running in parallel. The question Rocco had thought of at 3 a.m. on the 3rd day, lying awake in the too large bedroom with the weight of it sitting on his chest. If his mother had built that operation, the forged letters, the bribed staff, the lawyer, the coordinated departure, she had not done it entirely alone. The forgery alone required a specific skill set. The medical contact required either a prior relationship or an introduction. Someone had introduced her, or helped her, or looked the other way at the right moment. Someone in the organization, or adjacent to it, had been aware of what Carmela was doing and had chosen silence. He had asked Marcus to find out who. Marcus had been quiet about the investigation in a way that meant it was going somewhere Rocco was not going to enjoy. On Thursday evening, 2 days before Saturday, Marcus came to the house. He came in the way he came when things were serious, without calling ahead, using the side entrance that bypassed the main security log. He found Rocco in the study and closed the door behind him and stood in the specific way he stood when what he was about to say was going to change something. "Tell me," Rocco said. "The forgery," Marcus said. "We traced the methodology, not just who did it, but who taught her the method. There's a man in Bridgeport. He's been operating as a document specialist for the Ferrano family for 12 years, but before that, he worked for us." Marcus paused fractionally. "He worked for your father." Rocco was still. "Your mother has had a relationship with him since your father was alive," Marcus said. "Long-standing. She used him twice before, for things I'm still pulling records on. Smaller, internal, administrative on the surface." He paused. "But the Ferrano connection is the piece I want you to hear." "Say it." "He's currently on a retainer that is partially funded through a Ferrano subsidiary." Marcus looked at him. "The Ferranos knew your mother was using him. I can't yet determine whether they knew what the job was, but the financial connection is documented and it goes back 4 years. Rocco said nothing. The Ferranos were a mid-tier family operating in the southern part of his territory. Not powerful enough to be a direct threat, not small enough to dismiss. They had been quiet for years in the specific way of people who are waiting for something. 4 years, Rocco said, after the job was done. Yes. Marcus's voice was careful, which suggests they didn't commission the original operation, but they found out about it afterward, and rather than bring it to you, they bought the man who could prove it. He said it flatly. They put him on retainer. They kept the evidence close and kept their mouths shut. He looked at the window. Why? Leverage, Marcus said simply. Against your mother, potentially. Against you, if it ever became useful. Information about the DeLuca heir's wife and children being hidden, that's a card worth keeping. It's a card worth playing, Rocco said. If you have the right opponent and the right moment. Marcus said nothing, which was the answer. Rocco sat very still for a long time. Saturday was 2 days away. He had 3 children he had not yet met, and a wife who was not yet his wife again, and a situation that was, in all of its complicated, careful progress, closer to something real than anything he had experienced in 5 years. And now there was this. A Ferrano connection to a man who could document everything, information in the wrong hands about the existence of his children, their location, their ages. The specific, acute vulnerability of people who do not yet know they need protection. Do they know where she is? He said. I believe they know she's in the city. Whether they have a specific location? Marcus paused. I'd treat it as a possibility, not a certainty. Rocco stood up. He put both hands flat on the desk and looked at the surface of the wood and breathed through the specific cold clarity that came to him in moments like this. The moments when everything personal had to be set aside because there was something that needed to be handled before anything else could matter. Double the discreet security on the hotel. No visible presence. Serena can't know about this yet. I won't give her a reason to run before Saturday. He straightened. Set up a meeting with the Ferrano underboss. Neutral location. Within 48 hours. He paused. And Marcus. Yes. The document specialist in Bridgeport. I want him somewhere safe before that meeting happens. Not harmed. Safe. He's a witness, not a problem. He held Marcus's gaze. Yet. Marcus nodded once and moved toward the door. One more thing, Rocco said. Marcus stopped. When this is settled, he paused. The Ferrano family has been sitting on information about my children for 4 years. Information they could have brought to me and chose instead to monetize. His voice was entirely level. The flat, cold, unhurried level of a man who has already decided. I'll want to address that thoroughly. After Saturday, Marcus looked at him for one brief moment. Understood, he said. He left. Rocco stood alone in the study. The house was quiet around him. The enormous, hollow quiet that had lived in its walls for 5 years. He looked at the photograph on the desk. He kept only one, a small, unframed print that he had found in a drawer 2 years after she left, a picture someone had taken at a party before they were married. Before any of this. She was laughing at something outside the frame. He had no idea what. He had 3 children he had never met. He had an enemy who had known about them for 4 years and said nothing. He had 2 days. And somewhere in the city tonight, in a hotel room 2 blocks from a park, 3 5-year-olds were asleep in the particular boneless, trusting way of children who do not yet know that the world contains the kind of people who would use them as instruments of leverage against a man who had only just learned their names. He picked up his phone. He sent Marcus a second message. Double the security to triple. Now, tonight. Then he set the phone down and looked at the photograph and understood, with the complete, settled, unambiguous clarity of a man who has crossed a line he did not see until he was already past it, that there was no longer any version of this situation in which caution was the operating principle. There was only protection. And whatever protection required, he would provide it, at whatever cost, without hesitation, for as long as it took. His children were in this city, and the city was no longer as safe as it had been 48 hours ago. The meeting with the Ferrano underboss was set for Friday at noon. Rocco spent Thursday night not sleeping, which had become something close to a routine. He sat in the study with the security reports Marcus had compiled. 3 separate updates across the evening, each one confirming that the hotel was clean, the perimeter was covered, that 3 children and their mother had eaten dinner and watched something on a small screen and gone to bed at 8:30 without incident. He read each update with the specific, exhausting vigilance of a man who has discovered he is afraid of something for the first time in years and finds the experience profoundly disorienting. Fear, for Rocco DeLuca, had always been a professional instrument, something he understood from the outside, something he produced in others. The fear of a debtor, the fear of a rival, the fear of someone who has done something wrong inside his territory and is waiting to find out the cost. He had cataloged those fears the way a doctor catalogs symptoms. He was fluent in them. This was different. This lived in the body rather than the mind. It sat in his chest at 2 in the morning and made the security reports feel inadequate regardless of what they said, because the margin between adequate protection and insufficient protection when the people at risk were 5 years old, was not something he could reason his way into accepting. He called Marcus at 6 in the morning. "The Ferrano meeting," he said. "Who's coming?" "Dario Ferrano. The underboss, one associate." A pause. He agreed to neutral ground, the Whitmore Building, East Conference Room. He sounded cooperative on the phone. "He would," Rocco said. "He's been sitting on leverage for 4 years. He wants to see what I know before he decides what posture to take." "That's my read as well." "What's your read on the Bridgeport man?" "The document specialist." "He's in the safe location. Comfortable, for now. He knows he's not in trouble, but he also knows he's not going anywhere." Marcus paused. "He's scared, which is useful." "Has he said anything?" "Not yet. I thought you'd want to be present for that conversation." "I do, after the Ferrano meeting." He looked at the window. The morning was gray and slightly wet, the kind of morning that sits on the city like a damp cloth. "Get me into that room at 9. Before the Ferrano meeting, I want to hear what he says before I sit across from Dario." "I'll arrange it." Rocco put the phone down and changed his shirt and went downstairs to the kitchen, where the housekeeper had left coffee and nothing else because she had learned, over years of employment, that Rocco DeLuca did not want food in the morning. He stood at the counter and drank the coffee and looked at the garden through the window. The garden Serena had redesigned in their second year. The plantings she had chosen with the particular care of someone who expected to be there to watch them grow. The garden had been maintained. He had never told anyone to stop maintaining it. He did not entirely know what that said about him. He drank his coffee. He thought about Saturday. He thought about 3 children in a park and what he was going to say to them, and how Marco might look at him with those steel blue eyes, and whether Luca's restless sleep came from him or from something Serena carried, and whether Ava would be shy or direct or some version of both. He thought about the Ferranos having known for 4 years. He finished the coffee. He put on his jacket. He went to find out what the man from Bridgeport had to say. His name was Gerald Poole, and he was 52 years old, and he had the specific worn-down quality of a man who has spent his professional life in the margins of other people's illegalities. Not the people who commit them, not the people who order them, but the ones who provide the technical infrastructure and then try very hard to be forgotten. He was sitting at a plain table in a room with no windows on the second floor of a building in the warehouse district. And when Rocco came through the door, he went very still in the way of a man who has been told he is safe and does not entirely believe it. Rocco sat down across from him without any preamble. He put nothing on the table. He looked at Poole for a moment with the flat, unhurried attention he used in rooms like this, and watched the man's respiration rate climb slightly in response. "Gerald," he said. "Mr. DeLuca." Poole's voice was careful and a little dry. The voice of a man who is working hard at appearing calm and not entirely succeeding. "I want you to know that I know what you were," Rocco said. "You were paid to do a job, and you did it. I don't have a particular problem with that." He paused. "What I have a problem with is what happened afterward, so let's start there." Poole looked at his hands. "The Ferrano connection," Rocco said. "Walk me through it." A silence. Poole seemed to be making a calculation, the kind that involves estimating the cost of talking against the cost of not talking, and arriving at the conclusion that most people in this room eventually arrived at. "About 4 years ago," he said, "a man named Sestra came to see me. Works for Dario Ferrano. He said they had an interest in the work I'd done, the previous work, for Mrs. DeLuca Sr. He still didn't look up. He said they weren't looking to expose anything. They just wanted to understand the scope of what had been done and maintain a relationship." "A relationship," Rocco said. "A retainer, monthly, not large." Poole paused. "I didn't know what they were going to do with the information. I told myself it was insurance, for them, against being pushed out of the Southern Territory. Because if they ever needed to pressure me," Rocco said, "they had documentation of something I didn't know existed." Poole was quiet, which was the answer. "What do they have specifically?" Rocco said. "Not what you told them. What documentation do they hold?" Poole finally looked up. His eyes were the eyes of a man who is very tired of carrying something. Copies of the original forgeries, the financial trace from Mrs. DeLuca's payments, the name of the lawyer, the contact at the clinic, he paused, and the name of the city where Mrs. Vale went, which I found out, through the lawyer, about 2 years after the fact. Rocco was very still. 2 years, he said. Yes. They've known where she was for 2 years. Poole looked at the table again. I believe so. The room was entirely silent. Rocco sat with that for a moment. 2 years. The Ferranos had known where Serena was, where his children were, for 2 years, and they had kept the information in the way you keep a weapon, cleaned and stored and ready for the right moment. The right moment had apparently not yet arrived, but the right moment, in the logic of men like Dario Ferrano, had a way of presenting itself when the circumstances changed. And the circumstances had very recently changed, because Carmela was out, and the internal structure of the DeLuca organization had shifted, and anyone watching closely enough would have identified the shift and begun recalculating. Did you tell them she was back in the city? He said. Poole's jaw tightened. Testor called me 10 days ago. He'd heard through another source, not from me, that something had changed, that you were, he stopped, that there was a woman and children in the city. He asked me to confirm. And you confirmed. A long pause. Yes, Poole said. Rocco stood up. He did it slowly, with the deliberate care of a man managing something very large inside a very controlled space. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Poole for one extended moment. You stay here, he said. You don't make calls. You don't use the bathroom without one of my people outside the door. He paused. And Gerald, if anything happens to those children because of information you provided, the retainer, the confirmation, any of it, the protection I'm currently extending to you becomes the least of your concerns. He said it without heat. That was the part that landed. Poole nodded. His hands had stopped being still. Rocco walked out. The Whitmore Building's East Conference Room was the kind of space that existed for exactly these conversations. Neutral, anonymous, with the plain furniture and bad lighting of a place that no one uses for anything that can be documented. Rocco arrived at 11:50 and was already seated when Dario Ferrano came through the door at noon exactly. Dario was 46, broad across the shoulders, with the heavy, deliberate movements of a man who had put on weight in the years since assuming his position, and carried it with the unconscious authority of someone who no longer needed to look physically dangerous. He had his associate, a young man, mid-30s, quiet, and when he saw that Rocco had come alone except for Marcus, his expression made the small calculation that such an arrangement always prompts and landed on something between confidence and caution. He sat down. His associate stood near the door. Marcus stood near the other. Rocco, Dario said, warm in the way that people who are not warm deploy warmth. I appreciate the call. It's been, 8 months since we've sat down? September, Rocco said, the Crestfield matter. That's right. He nodded with the ease of a man who is telling himself this is going to be fine. I was sorry to hear about your mother stepping back from operations. A strong woman. I always respected her. Did you? Rocco said. Something in the phrasing caught Dario's attention. The dryness of it, the lack of the social lubricant that typically occupies the first minutes of these meetings. His eyes recalibrated slightly. Absolutely, he said, more carefully. She was, Rocco agreed, very strong, unusually capable of sustained planning. He put both hands flat on the table. I want to talk about Gerald Poole. The name landed in the room like a stone in water. Dario's face didn't move, which was the tell. A man hearing a name he doesn't recognize produces a fractional delay while he places it. A man hearing a name he was hoping not to hear produces perfect stillness because the work of processing is already done. I'm not sure I know that name, Dario said. That's interesting, Rocco said, because Gerald Poole has been on your payroll for 4 years through a subsidiary you use for contractor payments on the south side. He watched Dario's face. He does document work, among other things. He did document work for my mother approximately 5.5 years ago. And then you found out about it and you put him on retainer and you had him confirm 10 days ago that my wife and children were in this city." Dario said nothing for a moment. His associate near the door had gone very still. "Rocco," Dario said. His voice had changed, still controlled, but with the texture of a man who is shifting from one script to another and needs a moment to find the new one. "Whatever you think—" "I don't think anything," Rocco said. "I have documentation, financial records, call logs, and the gentleman himself who is currently speaking at considerable length." He paused. "So I'm not here to determine whether it happened. I'm here to understand what you intended to do with the information." Dario looked at him for a long moment. The warmth was entirely gone. "Insurance," he said. "The same as anyone in this business. You hold information, you have options." "Options," Rocco repeated. "The territory arrangements have been—" Dario paused. "There's been pressure. From the north, from the Carvello group. We needed security. Knowing something that you didn't know gave us a position. My children gave you a position. I never intended to use it against the children. You confirmed their location to a man who reported to you 10 days ago." Rocco's voice was flat and precise, each word placed with surgical care. "What you intended and what the information could be used for are two separate things. And the people who might want to use it against me, against those children, don't require your permission once the information exists in the world." Dario sat back slightly. Something in his face shifted. Not fear exactly, but the beginning of the recognition that he had been in this room assuming one kind of conversation and was now in a different kind entirely. "What do you want?" he said. "Everything," Rocco said. "Every copy of every document Poole provided, every record of the Ferrano organization's knowledge of my family's situation, every person on your side who was briefed." He paused. "And in exchange, I will not pursue the question of what you plan to do with the information, because pursuing that question fully would not end well for the Ferrano family, and I have enough things to manage this week without adding that." Dario studied him. "And the territory question is a separate conversation, one we can have when this one is concluded." Rocco looked at him without expression. "But Dario, I need you to understand something very clearly." He waited until he was certain he had the man's complete attention. "My children are in this city. They are 5 years old. If anything happens to them, if anyone moves on that information, if it travels further than it already has, if I find out that the Ferrano organization has been anything other than completely cooperative with what I'm asking, there is no version of the subsequent conversation that ends well for you." He paused. "This is not a threat. I don't make threats. This is a description of what happens next, in the same way that gravity is a description of what happens when you drop something." Dario looked at him for a long moment. "You'll have everything by tonight," he said. Rocco stood. "I'll expect it," he said. He walked out of the room, and Marcus fell into step behind him, and neither of them spoke until they were in the elevator. "He'll deliver," Marcus said. "He'll deliver what he chooses to deliver," Rocco said. "Get me an independent count from Poole. Cross-reference." He paused. "And I want to know, before tonight, whether the information went anywhere else, whether Dario talked to anyone about what he had. I'm already working on it." The elevator opened. They walked through the lobby. "Tomorrow is Saturday," Marcus said. "I know. Do you want additional security at the park?" "Discreet, not visible. I don't want Serena to feel like she's walking into a security operation with 3 children." He pushed through the building's glass door into the gray afternoon. "Set it up so it's there, but she doesn't see it." Marcus nodded. "And if something surfaces between now and tomorrow morning?" Rocco looked up at the gray sky, then at the street, then at the ordinary Friday afternoon moving around him, people with coffee and bags and the unhurried motion of people who are not conducting these particular calculations. "Call me immediately," he said. "Whatever time it is." The call came at 2:47 in the morning. He was awake when it came, or close enough to awake that it reached him before the second ring. He picked up. Marcus. "You need to hear this," Marcus said, and the particular quality of his voice, stripped even further of inflection than usual, pressed flat in the specific way of a man containing something urgent, put Rocco sitting upright before the sentence was finished. "Talk. The Ferrano delivery came through at midnight. Poole helped us cross-reference. A pause. The documentation is complete. But there's a communication in the file, an internal memo about 8 months ago, that references a contact outside the Ferrano organization, someone who was asking about the DeLuca succession, about vulnerabilities. Another pause. Someone who approached them, not the other way. Rocco said nothing. The contact, Marcus said carefully, is identified only by an initial, in the memo, which suggests they were being deliberately protected from full documentation. He paused. But the account number for a payment they made to Dario, in exchange for what the memo describes as confirmation of operational details, traces to a shell company. I had someone work the shell through the night. And? It goes to a law firm, Marcus said. Bennett and Associates. Rocco was still. Bennett, he said. Tomas Bennett, Marcus said. Who was one of the men on the list of people loyal to your mother, who you removed from the organization 3 days ago? A pause. Who apparently did not wait to find out whether his removal was permanent before making a very large payment to the Ferrano family 8 months ago in exchange for operational details about your family's location and security. The room was very dark. Rocco sat in the dark of the bedroom with the phone pressed to his ear and felt the full weight of the architecture come into focus. Not gradually, but all at once, the way a picture emerges when you step back far enough. Tomas Bennett, his mother's man. On the surface, a lawyer, a fixer, someone who had sat in the edges of meetings for 12 years and been present and handled details and been, in the way of reliable infrastructure, essentially unremarkable. A man loyal to Carmela. A man who had watched Carmela be stripped of her position 3 days ago and had reached immediately for the instrument he already had in place. He's already moved, Rocco said. It was not a question. I believe the payment 8 months ago was preparatory, Marcus said, establishing the channel, confirming the information was accurate. But 3 days ago, when your mother was removed, he activated it. There was a call, Marcus said, from a number that traces to a prepaid phone purchased 6 months ago to a Ferrano contact line the night your mother was removed. What was said? We don't have audio, but the call was 40 seconds, and 12 hours after it happened, there was movement at an address 2 blocks from your hotel. Rocco stood up. What kind of movement? A car, parked. Not the same car as the previous nights. It was there for 4 hours and then gone. No plates. A pause. It could be nothing. It could be surveillance. I'm treating it as the latter. Move, Serena, Rocco said. Now. Tonight. It's 3 a.m, 3 children. Marcus. His voice came out quiet and absolute. Move her now. Wake her up. Get her and the children to the Fairfield property, the one that's not in any name connected to me. Do it in the next 20 minutes. Use 2 vehicles. Stagger the departure. He was already moving across the bedroom, pulling clothes. I'll be there by the time you arrive. She won't like being woken at 3. She will like it considerably more than the alternative. Go. He ended the call. He dressed in the dark with the particular efficiency of a man who has done things quickly in the dark before and has no patience for fumbling. He called Dante as he moved to the door. He called Viteri. He gave both of them specific, clipped instructions and ended both calls before anyone asked questions. He went down the stairs of the 2 large house with the 2 large silents around him and out through the garage and got in the car himself. He drove. He drove through the empty 3 o'clock city with a precision and speed that left no margin for anything except getting there, and he was 6 blocks from the hotel when his phone rang. Marcus. She's up, Marcus said. She didn't argue. She's getting the children dressed now. Something in Rocco's chest moved. The specific internal shift of a thing that was clenched releasing by 1 degree. Good. How long? 10 minutes. We'll be on the road in 10. I'll meet you at the Fairfield property. He paused. Marcus, how are the children? A brief silence. Luca's crying. The girl, Ava, is apparently helping her mother pack a bag. Another brief pause, and something almost imperceptible moved through Marcus's voice. Marco is sitting by the door of the room. He asked one of my men if everything was going to be okay. Rocco said nothing for a moment. What did your man say? He said. He said yes. Good. He pressed the accelerator. Make sure it's true. The Fairfield property was a house he had purchased 3 years ago under a name that had no connection to any name he used anywhere else in his operational life. He had maintained it as an off-grid location, not a safe house in the obvious sense, not staffed or surveilled in the way that would make it identifiable to anyone who knew his organization's infrastructure. Just a house. Clean, functional, anonymous. He arrived 11 minutes before Marcus's vehicles. He stood in the driveway in the dark with Dante at his side and watched the 2 cars come down the private road. And when they stopped and the doors opened, he saw Serena get out first. She always led, he was already learning, always put herself between the unknown and the children. With Luca on her hip and her face carrying the specific expression of a woman running on no sleep and controlled adrenaline, her jaw set and her eyes already scanning the property the way she must have learned to scan things in 5 years of alone. She saw him. She walked toward him with Luca against her shoulder, and Luca had his face pressed into her neck with the particular exhaustion of a child who has been woken in the middle of the night and has not yet decided whether to be frightened or merely irritable. Behind her, one of Marcus's men was walking with Ava on his back, and Marco beside him holding the man's hand with the focused gravity of a 5-year-old who has decided that what is happening is serious, and he intends to be serious about it. She stopped in front of Rocco. She didn't say anything at first. She looked at him with those dark eyes that had always seen more than she let on, and then she looked at the house, and then back at him. How bad? She said. I don't know yet, he said. Bad enough that I wasn't willing to wait until morning. She looked at Luca on her shoulder. He's been asking when we're going home. I know, I'm sorry. She looked back at Rocco. Something in her expression was difficult to read. Not anger, not quite fear, something more complex than either. The look of a woman recalibrating something she had already calibrated twice and was now being asked to calibrate again. Who is it? She said. A man named Bennett. He was connected to my mother. He paused. He appears to have preemptively arranged something before he was removed from the organization. How long has this been in place? 8 months, possibly longer. She absorbed that. Which means while we were standing in that clothing store, while you were sitting across from me in that cafe. She looked at him steadily. Someone already had a channel in place. Yes. And you didn't know? No. She was quiet. Luca shifted against her shoulder and made a small sound, half word, half sleep, and she adjusted her hold on him with the automatic ease of a woman who has done this 10,000 times. Her free hand came up and pressed against the back of his head. Rocco, she said, I'm going to handle it. I know you are. Her voice was even and careful. But I need you to understand something. She held his gaze. I brought my children into your world. I am standing in a driveway at 3 a.m. with a 5-year-old who's been dragged out of bed and 2 others who don't know what's happening because someone connected to your organization has been mapping our location for 8 months. She paused. I need you to tell me, not as a promise, not as reassurance. I need you to tell me concretely what you are going to do and how long it is going to take. He looked at her. He looked at Luca's small hand pressed against her shoulder. He looked at Marco, who was standing very still 10 feet away watching the adults with those pale, serious, terrifyingly familiar eyes. I'm going to find Bennett tonight, he said. I'm going to find out exactly what he set in motion and when. And I'm going to dismantle it piece by piece before any part of it can be used. He paused. How long it takes depends on what I find, but I won't bring you back out until I can tell you with certainty that it's done. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. Not warm, not forgiving, not anything beyond the flat, exhausted agreement of a woman who is out of alternatives and knows it. She turned and carried Luca toward the house. Marco watched her go. Then he looked at Rocco. He looked at him with a directness that was entirely unsettling in a child that age. Not the frank curiosity of the clothing store, but something more focused, more assessing. The look of a small person who is trying to decide what category a new thing falls into. Rocco crouched down. He did it slowly, bringing himself to eye level, giving the child time to process the movement. Marco didn't step back. "Hi," Rocco said. Marco looked at him. "Are you the man Mama knows?" "Yes." "She looked at you like she knows you a lot." "We've known each other a long time," Rocco said. Marco considered this. His eyes, those pale, steel blue, mirror image eyes, were absolutely steady. "Why are we at a new house in the nighttime?" "Because I wanted to make sure you were all somewhere safe." "Safe from what?" Rocco looked at him. He thought about 5 years. He thought about what a child this age could hold and what he couldn't, and what he deserved to be told and what could wait. "From some people I need to have a conversation with," he said. "Grown-up stuff." "Boring." He paused. "Is there anything you need inside?" Marco thought about this seriously. "Luca's blanket is in the bag," he said. "He needs it or he won't sleep." "I'll make sure someone gets it." Marco nodded once with the specific decisiveness of a small person who has concluded a negotiation to his satisfaction. Then he looked at Rocco for one more moment. "You have eyes like me," he said. He said it without particular emphasis, just noted it, the way children note things, directly, without the social complexity adults wrap around observation. Rocco looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "We do." Marco turned and went inside after his mother. Rocco stayed crouched in the driveway for a moment after the child was gone. Then he stood up. Dante was behind him, waiting with the phone and the patience of a man who has learned to be very patient. "Get me Bennett's location," Rocco said. "Already working." "And Dante?" "Boss?" Rocco turned toward the car. The house was lit now inside, warm light spilling through the windows, and from somewhere inside came the sound of a child's voice. Luca, probably, the specific tone of a child who is explaining something with great urgency to an adult who is trying to settle him, and the low, steady response of Serena's voice beneath it. "Whatever you find tonight," Rocco said, "I want it done before morning." He got in the car, the door closed, and whatever Tomas Benet had been preparing, whatever channel he had opened, whatever he had confirmed, whatever machinery he had set moving in the 12 hours since Carmela lost her position in this organization, Rocco DeLuca was going to find it, follow it to its end, and close it with the particular finality that he reserved for things that had threatened what mattered to him most. Only now, for the first time in 5 years, what mattered to him most had a face. It had 3 of them. And none of those faces were going to be made to pay for the decisions of the people around them. Not while he was breathing, not ever. They found Tomas Bennett at 4:20 in the morning. He was not at his apartment on Crescent Hill, which was the first place Dante checked. He was not at the office on Mercer Street that he used for legitimate business, nor at the secondary property in Eastwick that Marcus had on file from 3 years back when Bennett had been, to all appearances, a reliable and unremarkable component of the DeLuca organization's legal infrastructure. He was at a hotel in the waterfront district, room 412, registered under a name that was not his own, which told Rocco everything he needed to know about how long Bennett had been planning for the possibility of this night. Rocco went in with Dante and 2 others. The hotel was the kind of mid-tier establishment where the night staff had learned not to notice things, and they did not notice the 4 men who moved through the lobby at 4 in the morning with the specific coordinated economy of people who have done this before. The elevator. The corridor. Room 412 at the end. Dante knocked. The pattern of a hotel porter. 30 seconds of silence. Then the sound of movement. The door opened on the chain. Dante hit it with his shoulder and the chain gave, and the door swung back hard against the interior wall, and Tomas Bennett stumbled backward in his undershirt and slacks with his phone in his hand, and the expression of a man whose calculations have just been proven catastrophically wrong. Rocco walked in. Bennett was 51. He had the build of a man who had been athletic once and had let it soften over a decade behind a desk, and he was breathing fast, and the phone in his hand was already dark. Whatever call or message he had been attempting had either gone through or been interrupted, and Rocco did not yet know which. "Sit down, Tomas." Rocco said. Bennett sat. The bed caught him behind the knees and he dropped onto it with the graceless urgency of a man whose legs have stopped working correctly under stress. He set the phone on the mattress beside him and looked at Rocco and did not say anything, because there was nothing available to say that wouldn't make it worse. Rocco looked at the phone. He nodded at Dante. Dante picked it up. "Last outgoing call," Rocco said. Dante looked at the screen, his jaw tightened by a fraction. 4 minutes ago, he said. 48 seconds. Rocco looked at Bennett. "Who did you call?" Bennett's throat moved. "Rocco? Who?" He stopped. His eyes went to the window, not because there was anything at the window, but because people look away when they are trying to build something fast. "I was calling my attorney. At 4 a.m. I knew you'd come. I wanted—" "Who did you call, Tomas?" The name came out with a quality that closed every available exit in the room. Bennett looked at him. He looked at Dante. He looked at the two men by the door. "Moretti," he said. The room temperature did not change. Rocco's expression did not change. But something moved through him that was not quite surprise and not quite anything else with a clean name. It was more like the specific internal sensation of a picture becoming complete, of the last piece settling into a position that made the whole thing suddenly, irrevocably clear. Sal Moretti, capo of the Eastern Division. A man who had been in the organization for 20 years, who had run the Eastern ports through 3 different regime changes, who had sat at the table through everything. The expansion, the wars, the long, careful consolidation that had made the DeLuca organization what it was. A man who had expressed, in the measured way of someone choosing their words for the record, quiet concern when Carmela was removed. Who had asked Marcus, in the offhand tone of someone making conversation, whether the situation with the Don's family was going to affect the Eastern operations. A man who had been, apparently, waiting. "Moretti told you to make contact," Rocco said, "when I moved on my mother." Bennett said nothing, which was the answer. "He's been running his own calculation," Rocco said. Not to Bennett, not to Dante, just out loud. Since she was removed, if the structure changed, if I was distracted, managing the family situation not fully operational, he saw a window. "Rocco, I swear I didn't know what he was planning." "Shut up." Rocco looked at Dante. "Get Marcus. Tell him Moretti." He paused. "And tell him to move everything we have that could be read as a vulnerability. Now, full protocol." Dante stepped out of the room with the phone already at his ear. Rocco looked at Bennett. "The call was 48 seconds, he said. "What did you tell him?" Bennett looked at the floor. "The address," he said. "The Fairfield property." A pause that seemed to cost him something. "The one you moved her to tonight." The words landed with a weight that was physical. Rocco felt it in his chest, the specific pressure of something closing at speed. "How did you know about the Fairfield property?" he said. "Carmela." Bennett's voice had gone thin. "She kept records of everything, every property, every account. She always said, if it came to it, information was the only currency that didn't devalue." He looked up. His eyes were the eyes of a man who understands he has nothing left to protect. "She gave me everything, in case something happened to her position, in case there was a transition and we needed leverage to negotiate our place in the new arrangement." Rocco stood very still. So his mother had not simply built the original architecture, the letters, the departure, the 5 years of silence. She had also, in the methodical way of a woman who planned for every contingency, built a secondary layer: documentation, properties, an inventory of knowledge to be distributed to her most trusted people in the event that she was ever removed. A dead woman's switch, built into the foundations of his own organization. He had stripped her of her position 3 days ago, and 48 hours later, the information she had distributed was already being converted into action. He pulled out his phone. He called Marcus directly. Marcus picked up before the first ring had finished. "I heard from Dante. The Fairfield property is compromised," Rocco said. "Moretti has it. How long do we have?" "If the call was 4 minutes ago and he was waiting for it," Marcus paused, and Rocco could hear the particular silence of a man running calculations at speed. 40 minutes. Maybe less if he already had people staged. Move them now. Don't call me until they're out of the building and in a secondary vehicle. He paused. And Marcus. Yes. Don't tell Serena it's Moretti. Tell her we're moving as a precaution. Tell her... He stopped. He thought about what to tell her and found that no version of it was clean. Tell her the truth. She deserves the truth. He paused. She's better at handling it than we are. He ended the call. He looked at Bennett. Is there anyone else who has what you had? He said. Other people Carmela gave copies to. Bennett shook his head. Just me. And Carlucci, but Carlucci burned everything the night you made the announcement. He called me. He was afraid. Carlucci was smart, Rocco said. He nodded at the man near the door. Stay with him. He doesn't leave. He doesn't make any more calls. He doesn't have anything sharp. He turned to go. Rocco. Bennett's voice had the specific quality of a man trying one last thing. I've been with this organization for 12 years. I've never... You were with my mother for 12 years, Rocco said without turning around. That's a different thing. He walked out. Mapus. He drove back through the pre-dawn city with Dante in the passenger seat and the specific compressed quality of a situation that had passed the point of management and entered the territory of response. Moretti had 40 minutes, maybe less. Marcus was moving Serena and the children. The full protocol meant every available soldier in the Eastern Division was being stood down. Every position was being reevaluated. Every location that Carmela might have cataloged was being secured or abandoned. It was 4:38 in the morning, and the DeLuca organization was, for the first time in years, actively reconfiguring under pressure. His phone lit. Marcus. They're out, Marcus said. Secondary vehicle. 3 minutes ago, I have them. Where? Moving. I'll tell you when they're stopped. Is she? She's calm, Marcus said with the brevity of a man who knows what the real question was. Marco fell back asleep in the car. Ava's asking questions. A fractional pause. She's handling it. Tell her I'll be there. She said she knows. He put the phone down. Something in that landed differently than it should have. The simplicity of it. The fact that Serena had said I know without apparent bitterness or performance, just as a statement of what she believed. After everything. After 5 years and 3 children, and an abrupt 3 a.m. evacuation from a property she hadn't been in for 8 hours. She said she knew. He drove. The second location Marcus chose was a property in the North End, smaller than the Fairfield house, anonymous in the specific way of a building that had been used for this purpose before and had been maintained for exactly this kind of contingency. Rocco arrived at 5:15, 2 vehicles outside, light on inside. He went in. Serena was in the kitchen. She had made coffee, found the kettle and the filters and the grounds in an unfamiliar kitchen at 5 a.m. with the same practical efficiency she applied to everything. And she was standing with her back against the counter and a mug in both hands when he came through the door. She looked at him the way she had been looking at him since the clothing store, assessing, careful, gathering information. He sat down at the kitchen table. She put a second mug in front of him without asking. He said, "It's Sal Moretti." She sat down across from him. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Is he coming for us?" "He's going to try. Tonight." "Probably. Maybe already." He looked at the mug. The coffee was too hot to drink, but he drank it anyway, because the mundane discomfort of it was something to hold on to. He had people staged. He was waiting for Bennett's call. The Fairfield address was the trigger. She was quiet for a moment. "How many people?" "I don't know yet. Marcus is working it." He paused. "The Eastern Division is his. 20 years he's been building it. I should have read the signal when he asked about the Eastern operations." He stopped. "I was distracted." "You were dealing with your mother and your children and the Ferrano situation in the space of 4 days," she said. "You weren't distracted. You were overwhelmed." He looked at her. "That's different," she said. "Not kindly, not unkindly, just factually. The result is the same. The result isn't settled yet." She held his gaze. "What do you need to do?" Find out where he's staging from. Intercept it before it moves. He paused. Marcus is building me a picture. I'm waiting for it. And the children. Stay here. More people outside. Moretti doesn't have this address. Carmela didn't have it. This one was never in any documentation I shared inside the organization. He paused. It's the safest location available. She nodded. One short, decisive nod. His phone lit up. Marcus. He picked up. Talk. 2 locations, Marcus said. His voice had the clipped operational quality he used in the middle of actions, each word stripped to its minimum necessary weight. Moretti has people at a warehouse on the South Dock. That's his primary staging. 10 to 12 men. And a secondary team, smaller, 4 or 5, that appears to be mobile. The mobile team is the one I'm concerned about. Why? Because I don't know where they are. A pause. I have the warehouse. I have 12 men and Viteri and 6 others moving on it right now. But the secondary team went dark 20 minutes ago and I can't place them. Rocco looked at Serena across the table. She was watching him with the focused, still attention of a woman who is reading a one-sided conversation and getting enough from it to understand the shape. How long on the warehouse? He said. Viteri's team is 12 minutes out. And Moretti himself. At the warehouse. I'm confident on that. Another pause. But Rocco, if the mobile team is the one he sent for the family, then they're already moving. Rocco stood up. He looked at Serena. I need you to take the children to the interior room, the one with no exterior windows. Now. She did not argue. She stood up, set her mug down, and moved toward the hallway with a speed that told him she had been waiting for the moment she would need to move. He spoke into the phone. How many people do I have at this location? 4 outside, 2 inside. Get me 2 more from wherever you can pull them, fast. 8 minutes. That might be too long. He moved to the window, looked out at the pre-dawn dark. The street was empty. The cars outside were where they should be. Nothing moved. Marcus, I need the mobile team found in the next 5 minutes. I'm on it. He ended the call. He turned to find Dante at his shoulder. You heard. Secondary team, mobile, unlocated. Dante's voice was even. Could already be close. Assume they are. He looked at the 2 men who had been inside. Young, capable, the kind of men who had been chosen for this kind of work specifically because they did not panic. You. Back of the house. Cover the east approach. You. Front door. Nothing comes through. Dante stays with me. Both men moved. He went down the hallway. The interior room was the second on the left. No windows, solid door, used for storage originally, cleared now. He knocked. It's me, he said. The door opened. Serena. Behind her, in the dim light, 3 children arranged in the particular configuration of people who are close to each other in a small space. Ava pressed against her mother's side. Luca on the floor with his blanket around his shoulders. Marco standing apart again, near the back wall, watching. Stay in here regardless of what you hear, Rocco said. Don't open the door unless I'm the one knocking, and I use this. He knocked 3 times. Pause. Once. If anyone uses any other pattern, don't open it. Serena looked at him. Rocco. I'll be right outside. I know. She reached out and caught his arm briefly. Just her hand on the sleeve of his jacket. 1 second, grip and release. Come back. He looked at her. He looked past her at Marco, who was watching him from the back wall with those pale eyes open and entirely alert in the specific, unsettling way of a child who understands that something real is happening. I'll come back, he said. He pulled the door closed. He turned around and heard, from the back of the house, the sound of glass. Just mound. It happened fast in the way everything real happens fast. Not the choreographed slow motion of imagined violence, but the compressed, overlapping, brutally quick sequence of events that leaves gaps in memory even as it's occurring because the brain cannot process everything at full resolution. The man who came through the back window was already inside before the guard at the east approach had turned. There was a sound, short, ugly, And then the guard was down and the intruder was moving through the kitchen with the specific professional speed of someone who has a layout and a target and a limited window. Rocco came around the corner from the hallway, and they met in the kitchen doorway. The man was bigger than him by 30 pounds. He had a weapon in his right hand. He raised it. Rocco moved left, and the shot went into the doorframe, and the sound of it inside the enclosed space was enormous, stunning, the kind of pressure that you feel in your back teeth. He closed the distance before the man could recenter, drove his elbow into the larger man's forearm, and felt the weapon drop. And then they were close enough that weapons didn't entirely matter, and what mattered was the specific grinding, graceless business of two men trying to end each other in a kitchen at 5 in the morning. He was hit twice before it was over. Once in the ribs, not a punch, an elbow, the compact, vicious kind that cracks rather than bruises. And once across the jaw, which snapped his head sideways and for approximately 1 second reduced his vision to bright static. He tasted blood. He drove forward on instinct, used his weight rather than his reach, took the man off his feet and down onto the kitchen floor with a crash that rattled the window above the sink. It ended. He stayed on his knees for a moment, breathing. His ribs were screaming. His jaw felt like something was wrong with the alignment of it, and the blood in his mouth was from his lip, bitten on impact. He breathed through it. Dante came through the back door with his weapon up and took in the scene and said, "Status." "I'm up," Rocco said. He got to his feet. "How many came in?" "One through the back. I had one at the side who is no longer a concern." Dante lowered his weapon. His eyes tracked over Rocco the way a man's eyes track when he is assessing damage and deciding whether to say anything about it. He decided not to. "That's 2. The team is 4 or 5. Where are the others?" As if in answer from the front of the house, the sound of Dante's man at the front door engaging with something outside. Not a single shot. Multiple. Rocco moved. Down the hallway, toward the front. His ribs sent a specific, bright, nauseating signal with every step, and he managed it the way he had always managed physical pain, by placing it in a separate room in his head and closing the door and attending to it later. The front of the house was chaos for approximately 90 seconds. 2 men from Moretti's team had come through the front approach. His man was holding the doorway, but barely, and the angle was wrong, and Rocco came in from the side with Dante behind him, and the 3 of them worked the narrow front room with the brutal pragmatism of people who have no room for error and know it. When it was over, he was standing in the front room with his back against the wall, and the sounds outside had changed. More engines, different voices, the arrival of Marcus's people in the vehicles that had been 8 minutes out. He counted his own breathing. Slow. Each breath sent the ribs into specific commentary. His phone rang. "Marcus." "We have the warehouse," Marcus said. "Vitteri's team took it. Moretti is contained." A pause. "He's asking for terms." "He doesn't get terms," Rocco said. His voice came out thicker than usual from the jaw. "He gets a room and a long conversation, and then the organization decides what happens to a capo who moved on the Don's family." "And the secondary team?" 4 of them, 2 in custody here, 2 who are no longer going to be anyone's concern." He paused. "I need a medical at this location." A fractional pause from Marcus. "How bad?" "Manageable. Ribs and a jaw. I've had worse." He breathed. "How's Vitteri?" "One of his men took a shoulder. He's okay." "Good." He pushed off the wall. The ribs sent their complaint again. He ignored it. "I'm going to check on the family." He walked back down the hallway. The sounds of the house were settling. The specific dropping pressure quality of a space that has processed something violent and is returning to itself. He stopped at the interior door. He knocked. 3 times. Pause. Once. A beat. The door opened. "Serena." She looked at his face, at his jaw, at the jacket. Her expression did something complex that she controlled before it fully formed, pressing it down with the same discipline that had been holding everything together for 5 years. She looked at him the way you look at something you are assessing for damage, and finding more than you wanted to find and deciding not to say it. "The children," he said. "Fine." Her voice was steady. "They're fine." She reached up and touched the side of his jaw very briefly, clinical, swift, the touch of someone checking rather than comforting, and said, "That needs to be looked at." "It will be." "Sal Moretti," she said, "is contained." "The people he sent here?" "Are handled." She looked at him for a moment. Behind her, in the interior room, he could hear Luca's voice asking something and Ava answering in the specific authoritative way of a 4-minute older sibling who has appointed herself the expert on things. "Come inside," she said. He went in. The room was small and dim and warm from 4 people having been in it for 30 minutes, and Marco was sitting against the back wall exactly where he had been when Rocco closed the door. And Luca had moved to his mother's vacated spot on the floor and was wrapped in his blanket with the focused personal determination of a child who has decided if he can't sleep, he can at least be cozy. Ava was standing in the middle of the room. She looked at Rocco with the frank, concentrated curiosity of a small person who has been told to stay in the room and has found this instruction professionally limiting. "You have blood on your face," she said. "I know." "Does it hurt?" "A little." She considered this with serious attention. "Luca cries when he has blood, from when he fell off the thing at the park." "I know a kid like that," Rocco said. "Luca's not a baby," Luca said immediately from inside his blanket. "I only cried for a little." "You cried for 20 minutes, Ava said. "It was a big fall." The specific, immediate, absolute normality of the exchange, the same argument that had clearly been had before, the same positions occupied by both parties with the confidence of long practice, moved through Rocco with a quality he could not name. Not amusement, or not only that. Something bigger underneath it. The strange, almost unbearable specific reality of these 3 people, their smallness and their noise, and the way they existed in this room entirely without awareness of what had just happened in the front of the house and the kitchen, because their mother had done exactly what she promised and kept them inside and kept them whole. He looked at Marco. Marco was watching him, still. "Hey," Rocco said. "Hey," Marco said. "You okay?" Marco seemed to consider the question seriously. "I heard a loud noise," he said. 2 loud noises. "I know, it's done now." Marco looked at him for a long moment. Those eyes. That particular inherited steadiness. "Are you the one who made sure we were safe?" he said. Rocco looked at him. "Yeah," he said. Marco nodded, just once, with the specific conclusive quality of a child who has gotten the answer he was looking for and filed it in the appropriate place. Rocco sat down on the floor. His ribs made this extremely clear as a life choice. He sat anyway, because sitting down in this room, at this level, in this specific space, was what was needed, and whatever it cost was what it cost. Luca looked at him from inside the blanket. "Can I see the blood?" he asked. "Luca," Serena said. "I just want to see it," Luca said with the injured dignity of a scientist whose research has been curtailed. "I'm not going to touch it." "It's okay," Rocco said. Luca scooted forward and peered at the side of his jaw with enormous focus. He was close enough that Rocco could see the exact degree to which he did and did not resemble the other 2. The same frame, the same coloring, but something softer in the eyes, something more openly curious, less guarded. "It's not that much blood," Luca concluded. "I think you'll be okay." "Oh, good to know," Rocco said. He looked up at Serena. She was leaning against the door frame with her arms folded and her coffee mug abandoned somewhere in the last 30 minutes, and her eyes on him with the expression that was too complex to have a name. The expression she had been carrying since the clothing store, since the cafe, since the 3 a.m. driveway, accumulating information with the patience of a woman who knows that some things can only be understood over time. He looked at her. She looked at him. In the small, warm room with their 3 children around them, Luca inspecting the blood with scientific interest, Ava already redirected towards something she'd found in her mother's bag, Marco sitting against the back wall watching the adults with those too old, too familiar eyes. Something shifted. Not healed. Not settled. Not anything that simple or clean, but present. Both of them in the same room, on the same side of the same thing, for the first time in 5 years. Outside, Marcus's vehicles were on the street. The warehouse was secured. Moretti was in a room somewhere answering questions he did not want to answer. Bennett was in custody. The architecture his mother had built was, piece by piece, being taken apart. It wasn't finished. There were conversations ahead that would be long and difficult, decisions about the organization that needed to be made with the care they deserved, questions about Moretti and the Eastern Division and the Ferranos that required resolution. There was the old family council, which had known enough and said nothing, and which Rocco had not yet formally addressed. There was Carmela, in her house in Ridgemont, who had not called because he had told her not to, who was sitting in the specific silence of a woman waiting to find out what her choices had ultimately cost. There was all of that. But right now there was this room, and the small warm noise of 3 children who did not know how close it had come and did not need to, and the particular, enormous, complicated, specific fact of being alive in the same space as people who were his, unambiguously, irreversibly, regardless of the 5 years and the letters and the damage done in both directions, his. He leaned his back against the wall. His ribs sent their message. He noted it, filed it. Luca, apparently satisfied with his medical assessment, had scooted back to his blanket. Ava had found something in the bag and was now sharing it with Marco in the particular negotiation of siblings who have worked out their own complex economy of trade and exchange. Marco accepted what she offered him and ate it without looking up from watching Rocco. "You going to stay?" Marco said. Rocco looked at him. The question was simple in the way that children's questions are simple, without the layers of meaning that adults load onto the same words, but also, because of that, without the evasion that adults use to avoid answering them. He looked at Serena. She was watching him, waiting. "Yeah," he said, "I'm going to stay." Marco nodded, went back to the thing Ava had given him, and somewhere on the other side of that room, in the first gray light beginning to come through the crack under the door, Saturday was arriving. The medical came at 6:15, a doctor Marcus had used for years, a quiet man named Heller, who asked nothing beyond what the injury required and had built a career on exactly that quality, arrived at the North End house with a bag and the unhurried manner of someone summoned at dawn often enough that it no longer surprised him. He examined Rocco's ribs in the kitchen while the children ate cereal that Serena had found in the back of a cabinet and argued about who got the bowl with the blue rim. 2 cracked ribs. The jaw was bruised but intact. Heller taped the ribs with the brisk efficiency of a man who has done this many times and delivered the instructions. Nothing strenuous, limited rotation. The pain would peak at 48 hours and then begin dropping, in the flat tone of someone who understood that the patient would follow approximately none of them. Rocco thanked him. Heller left. Serena set a glass of water and 2 pills on the table in front of him without comment. He looked at them. He took them. She went back to the children. He sat in the kitchen and listened to the noise of breakfast, Luca explaining something at length to no one in particular, Ava correcting him periodically with the efficiency of a senior executive, Marco eating in the focused silence that seemed to be his natural operating mode. And he breathed carefully around the ribs and thought about what came next. What came next was the council. And he convened it 4 days later when the medical tape was still on, and the pain had peaked and was beginning its slow retreat, as Heller had predicted. He called every remaining capo, every senior member of the structure, every man who held a position of consequence in the DeLuca organization, and he had them brought to the main house on a Wednesday evening with no prior briefing about the agenda. They came in, and they sat down and they read the room with the collective animal alertness of men who have learned that being summoned without explanation is either very good or very bad, and the difference is determined entirely by what you have or have not done. Rocco stood at the head of the table. He did not sit for this. His ribs had an opinion about standing for extended periods, and he noted the opinion and set it aside. Sal Moretti, he said, attempted to move against my family using information obtained through a combination of my mother's records and a 4-year financial relationship with the Ferrano organization. He is no longer a capo. He is no longer a member of this organization in any capacity. The men who moved with him on the night of the 14th are being addressed individually. He paused. The Eastern Division will be restructured under direct oversight until a permanent appointment is made. Anyone who had prior knowledge of Moretti's intentions and said nothing should use the next 72 hours to come to me personally. After 72 hours, that window is closed. The room was very quiet. Tomas Bennett activated a channel that had been built without my knowledge during my mother's tenure. He has been removed from any legal or advisory role connected to this organization, and his cooperation in the investigation is the only reason the conversation stops there. He looked around the table. The Ferrano family has delivered full documentation as agreed. Their southern operations continue under the existing arrangement with a renegotiated territory boundary that reflects the cost of their 4-year silence. They were informed of the renegotiation yesterday. They accepted. He let that sit for a moment. My mother built an intelligence infrastructure inside this house that none of you knew about and that I did not know about. That failure is mine. The consequence of that failure came within a specific distance of costing me things I cannot replace. He looked at the faces around the table, one by one, the way he always looked at this room, measuring, reading, filing. The family council that operated under her influence and provided cover for decisions made without my knowledge is dissolved, permanently. The structure of this organization going forward runs through me and through the people I designate directly. There is no secondary authority. There is no informal council. There is no situation in which a decision about my family, my household, or my personal life is made by anyone in this room or anywhere else without my explicit knowledge. He paused. That is not a new rule, he said. It should have been the existing one. It wasn't enforced with sufficient clarity. It will be now. He sat down. The ribs objected. He ignored them. Any questions? He said. No one had questions. He went to see his mother on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the night at the North End house. He drove himself, alone, which he had been doing more often lately. The solitude of motion, the specific useful quality of having nothing to do except move from one point to another. The house in Ridgemont was a large colonial on a quiet street, maintained with the same precise attention that Carmela had always brought to the physical environment she occupied. The garden was immaculate. The walk was clear. He had called ahead, which he had not done the last time he visited this house, and she was at the door when he arrived, which told him she had been watching the drive. She looked older, not dramatically, not in the way of someone who had collapsed under the weight of consequences, but in the specific way of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for several weeks and was not accustomed to the weight. She wore black. She always wore black. He came in. She made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table in the house he had grown up in, and for a while neither of them said anything, and the silence was not comfortable, but it was not violent either. It was the silence of two people who have said the important things and are now sitting with the aftermath. "How are the children?" she said finally. He looked at her. He had expected many opening lines. Not that one. "Well," he said. "They're well." She wrapped her hands around her mug. She looked at the table. "Marco," she said. Marcus mentioned, I asked him, I know I shouldn't have asked him, but I asked, he said, "Marco has your eyes." "He does." She nodded. Something in her face moved in a way she did not attempt to control, which was unusual enough that he noticed it. "I made a decision," she said, "that I believed was right for this family. I made it with complete conviction, and I would be lying to you if I told you I was certain, even now, that the conviction itself was wrong." She paused. "The execution, the method." She stopped. "Your children grew up without you. That was not—" She pressed her lips together. "That is a cost I did not fully account for." He looked at her for a long time. "Is that an apology?" "It's the truth," she said. "I'm not certain I know how to apologize for something I did with complete intention." She held his gaze. "I know what that says about me." "Yeah," he said. "It does say something." They sat with it. "You'll keep the house," he said. "Your accounts are accessible. I'm not going to leave you without—" "I know," she said. "Marcus told me. What I can't give you," he said, "is access to my children until I know that the version of right that lives in your head has genuinely confronted what it produced." He paused. "That might take a long time. I don't know how long." She looked at him. Her eyes were dry. She had always been a woman who did not cry in front of people, who had considered it a form of argument she didn't need. "I understand," she said. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He looked around the kitchen, the familiar dimensions of it, the light through the window, the particular smell of the coffee she had always made the same way, and felt the specific, complicated grief of a thing that has been broken in a way that allows for repair but not restoration. "I'll call," he said. "I know you will," she said. He walked out. Autumn. Saturday came again. Another Saturday, 6 weeks after the first one. The one that had been replaced by an evacuation and a kitchen and a North End house and cracked ribs and everything that had followed. This Saturday was different. The park 2 blocks from the hotel was irrelevant now. Serena had moved 3 weeks ago into a house on the east side of the city. Not the DeLuca mansion, which neither of them had discussed, and which felt, for now, like a conversation that belonged to a future they hadn't fully negotiated yet. A house that was hers, chosen by her, in a neighborhood she had selected with the practical care of a woman who had been making these assessments alone for 5 years, and had developed strong opinions about natural light and proximity to decent schools and the specific ratio of space to noise that 3 children require. Rocco had paid for it. She had allowed that. They had not made a production of either the offer or the acceptance. It had happened in the pragmatic, slightly awkward way of 2 people recalibrating the financial architecture of a relationship that had no clean template, and then it was done, and they moved on. He arrived at 9. He knocked. Marco opened the door. This had begun happening 3 weeks ago. Marco at the door, with the specific gravity of a child who has appointed himself something and takes the appointment seriously. He stepped back to let Rocco in with the particular proprietary confidence of a small person in his own house. "Ava's mad," Marco reported, as he always reported the status of things. "About what?" "Luca ate the last of the good cereal." "The situation sounds serious." "It is," Marco said, with complete sincerity. From somewhere in the back of the house came Luca's voice raising the specific defense of someone who has done a thing and considers the outcry disproportionate, and Ava's response, which carried the weight of grievance and moral authority in roughly equal measure. And beneath it, the sound of Serena's voice, low, even, the practiced tone of a woman managing 3 separate emotional weather systems simultaneously and doing it without losing her footing. Rocco stood in the entry of the house and listened to it, the noise of it, the specific, unremarkable, extraordinary noise of a family having breakfast on a Saturday morning with all of its logistical friction and small injustices and the constant low-grade negotiation of people who are bound to each other by something older than any agreement they could have made. He walked into the kitchen. Serena was at the counter. She heard him and turned, and the look on her face was the look it had been gradually becoming over 6 weeks. Less guarded than the clothing store, less careful than the cafe, something quieter and more particular. The look of a woman who has not yet fully forgiven but has begun, in the specific concrete way of daily action rather than declared intention, to allow something. "Coffee's on," she said. "I know. I can smell it from the front door." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, the beginning of the movement that preceded one. Luca materialized at Rocco's side with the sudden spatial efficiency of a child who has learned that adults are sometimes useful in negotiations. "Can you tell Ava it was just cereal?" he said. "It was just cereal," Rocco said. "She doesn't think so." "I know. Have you apologized?" Luca's expression indicated that this suggestion had not previously occurred to him as a viable option. He turned and went back into the other room, and they heard the specific adjustment in the quality of the argument that indicated a new variable had been introduced. Serena handed him a mug. Their hands didn't touch in the exchange. They were still in the careful geography of proximity, the distance that shrinks and expands depending on the day, the not yet of it. He did not push it. Neither did she. They stood at the counter and drank coffee and listened to the children. From the other room came the sound of the argument resolving. Not dramatically, not with a declared peace, but in the way most things resolve between people who are stuck with each other, through the gradual mutual recognition that the thing was not worth the energy being spent on it, and the quiet pivot towards something more interesting. Marco came into the kitchen and stood beside Rocco. He did this sometimes, just stood near, without particular agenda, the way he'd been doing since the North End house. Since the night Rocco had sat on the floor with cracked ribs and said, "Yeah, I'm going to stay," and Marco had filed it away in whatever internal system he used for the things that mattered. "Are we going to the park today?" Marco said. Rocco looked at Serena. She looked at him. "Yeah," she said. "We're going to the park." Marco went back to tell the others. Rocco looked at his coffee. He set it down on the counter. He looked at Serena, who was looking at the window, at the ordinary Saturday morning light coming through it, and he thought about the clothing store, and the cafe, and the 3 a.m. driveway, and the kitchen floor and his mother's face across a table, and the particular long distance between who he had been 6 weeks ago and who he was standing in this kitchen right now. Not a different man, not cleaned up or made soft or anything that simple, but a man who had faced with full clarity the cost of the years that were gone and had decided that the answer to that cost was not more absence. "Serena," he said. She turned. He did not have a speech. He had never been a man for speeches. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and in the specific silence of two people who have already said the most important things in harder circumstances than a Saturday morning kitchen, what remained was smaller and more durable than anything that required language. "I know it's not fixed," he said. "No," she said, "it's not. I know I can't get back the 5 years. You can't. I'm not trying to." He held her gaze. "I'm just here for the ones in front of us." She looked at him for a long moment. The morning light was doing something to the room. Ordinary, accidental, the kind of light that lands on ordinary mornings without meaning to be significant, and sometimes is anyway. "Okay," she said. One word. The same word she'd used in the driveway. In the exhausted, unembellished way of a woman who was out of pretense. But different now. Not the flat acceptance of someone out of options. Something with more weight in it. Something chosen. From the other room, Luca's voice, already on to the next thing, already fully redirected, announcing with great urgency that he needed his shoes. Ava's voice answering that his shoes were by the door where she'd told him they were. Marco's voice, beneath both of them, saying nothing, just there. Rocco picked up his coffee and finished it. He set the mug in the sink. He went to find a 5-year-old's shoes. And the morning moved forward, imperfect, unglamorous, loud in all the ways that living with children is loud, with all the friction of people who are still learning the shape of each other after a long and complicated absence. And it moved forward the way things do when the people inside them have decided, without ceremony, without promise of anything easy, to keep showing up. That was all. That was, it turned out, everything.